Thank you for tuning in once again to his Vine and Victory podcast. My name is Kurt Olson. I'm your host. I'm coming to you on the afternoon of January 8th, 2025. And just want to bring a few things to your attention, saving the big one for last. Um, Going to lead off here with revisiting something I said at the end of the last podcast. That podcast dropped on Friday evening, and the speakers race had already happened, and that's why I didn't make some comments at that time. Um, so, just a little history. So, the Republicans regained the majority in 2022, the midterm election, and in January 2023, they have a small majority and it takes 12, 13, 14 votes before Kevin McCarthy becomes Speaker. There are folks in the caucus, the Republican caucus, that want changes to how the House is run, transparency on bills, a variety of things. And uh, promises were made sometime in 2024. Um, there was a move to unseat him as Speaker, and that's when they had multiple votes again. Jim Jordan's name came up, a couple of others, and eventually Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, becomes House Speaker. So, in the lead up to this Speaker's race, President elect Donald Trump vouches for Speaker Johnson. Now, the harsh reality is the House needs a leader. The House needs a speaker. The House needs someone in the majority party who's going to come forward and lead. Okay? That's just necessary for the functioning of the House. That has to happen. But let me describe to you why I believe Mike Johnson is a failed House Speaker. Now, I say that with this preface. Mike Johnson's a brother in Christ. Everything that I have read, heard, would indicate that he's a Christian. He did some work at the law school of my alma mater, Liberty University. Now, that wouldn't make him a Christian, but again, I don't have any reason to doubt that public testimony. Some people even had shot images of him praying with some folks on the House floor before the proceedings last Friday. So there's that. But I believe he's a failed leader. Let me explain. A couple weeks ago, my Sunday column, I wrote about Dr. Francis Collins. Dr. Francis Collins is or was the former head of the National Institutes of Health. And you might remember that during the COVID pandemic, the NIH got an awful lot of attention. First of all, because Anthony Fauci is leader of an office under the NIH, but also you would see Francis Collins attached to some things as well. Well, Francis Collins is a Christian. Um, all indications are brother in Christ and all that other stuff. But during COVID, there were some things that he did that he was instrumental in doing that brought me tremendous pause as a Christian. He covered up the origins of COVID 19 when it was known that it came from Wuhan, China. And it is believed now, very convincingly, with compelling evidence and overwhelming evidence, that the COVID 19 disease was either accidentally leaked or intentionally leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And Francis Collins was involved in making people believe it came from a wet market in the same province and from an animal. And so that's one thing. And then when there were people that came to the uh, public understanding that they had questions with how we were handling the pandemic, there were some scientists that wrote the Great Barrington Declaration. The Great Barrington Declaration, Dr. J. Bhattacharya, Dr. Martin Kulldorff, and there was a third doctor from Oxford University in England, came forward and basically said, focus protection on the elderly and those who are most vulnerable because they have a variety of health conditions that make them a risk for catching COVID 19. And focus your protection on those folks. Let everybody else continue on with their lives. And Dr. Francis Collins was involved in attacking the credibility and reputations of those doctors. And for me as a Christian, when a brother in Christ does that kind of thing, I'm like, what are you doing? Why aren't you being honest? Okay. So Francis Collins really becomes the precursor, at least in recent examples, of why I believe Mike Johnson's a failed leader. So 2024 goes down and they have votes. And as we get to the end of the year, as everybody knew was going to happen, a continuing resolution was necessary to continue the funding of government. And what happened with that? A 1,547-page bill that was filled with the funding of government. And it was filled with all kinds of stuff totally unrelated to it. And this bill was written by Mitch McConnell, Charles Schumer in the Senate, Mike Johnson, and Hakeem Jeffries in the House. 4 people. Now, they probably had some staff assist in the writing of this bill, but the harsh reality is it became the piece of legislation that was going to continue funding the government, and it was brought forth in the House just before the Christmas break. And there were many people, including Elon Musk, when they found out about the details of the bill, it got killed. Now, they eventually passed a bill for the funding of government, but Mike Johnson can't step away from the fact that he was responsible for bringing that initial bill to the House and giving them a kind of a deadline. In X number of hours, we're going to vote on this, which means you never have time enough to read it. The public doesn't know what's in it, and who cares? This is the kind of stuff that has been causing the House to run for a very long time. And if you are a Christian, when I was at Liberty University, Jerry Falwell, the dad, was chancellor of Liberty University at the time. And he had this phrase: if it's Christian, it ought to be better. And when I see brothers and sisters in Christ do this kind of thing, it certainly is not better. And the argument is, well, Olson, they need a leader of the House. They have to vote on someone, and no one else has the votes. Okay, I get it. You need a leader. But Mike Johnson is a failed leader. Now, this is what unfolded last Friday. So they have the initial vote, and he doesn't have the 218 to make him leader. He has 216. Thomas Massie, Ralph Norman, and a congressman with the last name of Self um, were the three holdouts. Well, Thomas Massie was getting an awful lot of criticism because he had no intention of changing his vote. Norman and Self did after a phone call directly from President elect Trump, who was golfing at the time, and he spoke to them directly. They ended up changing their votes, and that made Mike Johnson the speaker again. So Thomas Massie is getting a lot of friction for how dare he take this kind of a position. Well, Thomas Massie, Republican of Kentucky, is the congressman who warned us about COVID spending and that it was going to cause inflation. He is also the congressman that had a lot of problems with the proxy voting during the COVID pandemic. The proxy voting was this because we couldn't have these large crowds of people. They were allowing congressmen and women to give their vote to others who happen to be present and vote for them. So someone wouldn't be carrying just their vote. They might have like 20 or 30 along with it. That's what was going on with proxy voting. And Thomas Massie raised a ruckus over it. And frankly, Thomas Massie is one of the heroes of this Congress. He cares about the direction of the country. He cares about the reckless spending that's going on. And for that, he gets an awful lot of friction simply because he didn't like the way Mike Johnson handled the continuing resolution at the end of 2024, and he thought he was a failed leader and shouldn't be given the authority again. So that's some of the background on what happened with the speaker's race. And the House needed a leader, the House needed a speaker, and something had to be done. I get it. But why can't we have both a House Speaker and someone who has credibility and trust and a desire to change the way the House of Representatives functions? That's the only point I was making the entire time. Two stories I want to bring to you that involve as well finances. Um, One of these is from the Daily Caller, and the other one is from the Daily Signal. Both of them right of center publications. Um, the one that involves the Daily Caller, um, I'm not going to read it in entirety because it's fairly long. The title is this. Who wrote this? Owen Klinsky on January 4th. Government overreach. Liz Warren's favorite agency just granted itself new powers to regulate checking accounts. It reads, the lame duck Biden administration's Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, issued a rule in December to curb overdraft penalties in what experts told the Daily Caller News Foundation is an example of government overreach that will ravage low income Americans. The CFPB an agency that is considered the brainchild of Democratic Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, finalized the rule just weeks before President elect Donald Trump takes office with the aim of forcing banks to either cap overdraft fees at $5. The average for an overdraft, a check overdraft, an overdrawn check, is $35 from a bank, or to provide the overdraft as a form of credit rather than a penalty. While the policy's stated aim is to increase transparency and protect American depositors, experts told the Daily Caller News Foundation it will force banks to implement more stringent rules on bank accounts, limiting access to credit and financial services for low income Americans, and pushing more borrowers to return to payday lenders who typically charge far higher interest rates. Quote, this is a classic case of government overreach with regulators having no idea how private business works. End quote. E.J. Antoni, a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget, told the Daily Caller News Foundation, quote, these new regulations would eliminate certain services and impose stricter rules on bank accounts predominantly held by low-income folks. If those people need an extension of credit because they don't have sufficient funds to make an immediate expense, they'll be driven to even more costly payday lenders. While typical credit card annual percentage rates range from 15 to 30%, and personal loans are even lower, payday lenders often charge annual interest rates of anywhere from 300 to 500, according to Mayo Employees Federal Credit Union. In 2022, 17% of households with checking accounts reported that they or someone in their family paid an overdraft fee, with households with incomes under 30,000 twice as likely to report at least one draft as those with incomes over $100,000 or more. American household debt stood at a record 18 trillion at the end of the third quarter in 2024, increasing by nearly 4 trillion from when President Joe Biden took office in the first quarter of 2021, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Credit card balances have also surged since the COVID-19 pandemic, with American households holding 1.17 trillion in credit card debt in the third quarter of 2024, up from 770 billion in the first quarter of 2021. That's all I'm going to read of that story. But that personally impacts finances or potentially finances of individuals. Um, Going to read partially a second story, and this one involves Social Security. This is from the Daily Signal, a story that reads the same day, January 4th, make a resolution to fix Social Security. Um, and this is a big deal to me because I'm a Gen Xer, and Social Security and Medicare are on pace to not be solvent in the next decade when I would be approaching retirement. Um, Reading this. In the dreamlike days before Christmas and the regular work week's return of the new year, it's easy to believe all things are possible. Indulge in as much pie as you like. A resolution to eat healthier in 2025 will balance the scales. For most of us, this is harmless self deception. Unfortunately, Congress has the same mentality, and it's produced a bloated government that soon won't be able to afford what's been promised to taxpayers. Social Security and Medicare have some 10 years left before their trust funds are exhausted, and they'll no longer provide full benefits. Congress knows the deadline. Every year, a report from the program's trustees spells it out. The latest figures say Social Security will run dry beginning in 2035, with Medicare following suit the next year. Yet those estimates from May are already out of date, because the Senate decided to ring out 2024 by passing a proposal that actually makes Social Security less solvent and brings the breakdown a full year closer. A bipartisan bill taken up in December makes people who already have state, local, or federal government pensions eligible for more Social Security benefits than before. What the program actually needs, if it's going to survive another generation, is the opposite approach: means testing to match limited resources with the people who need them most, rather than expanding payouts to people with other retirement resources. While his colleagues played Santa Claus, Senator Rand Paul risked being branded a Grinch, proposing an amendment to prolong Social Security's life by gradually raising the retirement age to 70. Only two fellow Republicans, Utah's Mike Lee and Wyoming's Cynthia Lummis, backed this effort. The rest of the Senate, Republicans and Democrats alike, seems to view shoring up Social Security and Medicare as a resolution for some future new year. That's that story in the Daily Signal. And just just two simple economic stories. One about Social Security, one about overdraft charges, um, fees that banks charge on people that can and may impact people's pocketbooks. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. The last one, I'm going to be as candid as possible here because this involves a story that went down on New Year's Day. And the the details in the name of the individual are already available for the public. But 2 days following that, some things happened on social media which should give Americans a tremendous amount of pause. Um, I'd much prefer people watch my podcast. I'm trying to grow an audience here. But I'm going to end up saying the name of another podcaster, Sean Ryan. For those of you who do not know him, he is a former Navy SEAL, also has done some CIA contract work, and he has his own podcast. And he um, had a show late last week that was extremely eye opening on multiple levels. Um, and I would not make it a policy or a priority of reading a manifesto because a lot of manifestos are from people who just are not well mentally. There's a reason why that is going on. And, but because this, the person who authored this is already known, there's a federal investigation going on what happened. Um, I'm going to read you the details of an email that individual sent the Sean Ryan podcast, and I'm going to add as a disclaimer in advance of that, the FBI has already confirmed that said person authored the email that was sent to the Sean Ryan podcast. And I'm going to read this. but I'm going to keep out the name of the person. Um, Breaking: Sean Ryan says he is going into hiding following the release of his most recent episode, and this is from last Friday. This is the most recent episode where he shares an email allegedly sent by this person from Las Vegas, or who was in Las Vegas, before the Trump hotel explosion. Guest Sam Shomate says he was sent an email Tuesday from this person before the explosion saying the drones over New Jersey were operating by the use of gravitic propulsion system. Only the US and China have this capability, according to the email. On December 31st, Sam received an email allegedly from this person who would be named as the perpetrator in the detonation of a Tesla Cybertruck at Trump Tower in Las Vegas the following day. The following is the detail of the email that was sent to both Sam Shumate and Sean Ryan. In case I don't get to make it to my decision point, or this person believed that they were being followed by the feds, multiple entities from the alphabet agencies that exist in the federal government. Supposedly, he was trying to get to Mexico, and he believed that they were not going to let him get there. Um, Additionally, this person was a Green Beret, had probably some medals that were attached to his name, and everything would indicate that he was probably had PTSD. Perhaps more was going on with him. He had been divorced, um, had was in a second relationship, and he was separated from that girlfriend. So a few things going on there personally. But anyways, in case I don't make it to my decision point or onto the Mexico border, I am sending this now. Please do not release it until January 1st to keep my identity private until then. First off, I am not under duress or hostile influence or control. My first car was a 2006 black Ford Mustang V6 for verification. He was just proving to them that he is who he was. They could look up his uh, make, model of his car, and kind of confirm who he was. What we have been seeing with drones is the operational use of gravitic propulsion systems powered aircraft by most recently China in the East Coast, but throughout history, the US. Only we in China have this capability. Our open location for this activity is in the box below. Um, that was not known, and I don't even regard it as relevant to the email. China has been launching them from the Atlantic from submarines for years, but this activity recently has picked up. As of now, it is just a show of force, and they are using it similar to how they used the balloon for reconnaissance, which also was part of the integrated comm system. There are dozens of those balloons in the air at any given time. The so what is because of the speed and stealth of these unmanned aircraft. They are the most dangerous threat to national security that has ever existed. They basically have an unlimited payload capacity and can park over the White House, the Capitol, you name the building, and if they wanted, and if that happened, checkmate. These are vehicles that are anti-gravity. They cannot be detected by defense systems. So there's no way to see them coming and use a defensive system to take it out of the air. I've been followed for over a week now from likely Homeland or FBI, and they are looking to move on me, and are unlikely going to let me cross into Mexico, but won't because they know I am armed and I have a massive VBID, which is a vehicle-based explosive device. I've been trying to maintain a very visible profile and have kept my phone, and they are definitely digitally tracking me. I have knowledge of this program and also war crimes that were covered up during airstrikes in Nimruz province, Afghanistan, in 2019 by the administration, Department of Defense, Department DEA, and CIA. I conducted targeting for these airstrikes over 125 buildings. 65 were struck because of civilian casualties that cost hundreds of civilians, that killed hundreds of civilians in a single day. U.S. Forces in Afghanistan continued strikes after spotting civilians or initial others. It was supposed to take 6 minutes and scramble all aircraft at CENTCOM. The UN basically called these war crimes, but the administration made them disappear. I was part of that cover up with U.S. forces in Afghanistan and Agent Redacted of the DEA. That's the Drug Enforcement Agency. So I don't know if my abduction attempt is related to either. I worked with General Miller, stat Miller staff on this as well as the response to Bala Mugrab, and just a few more details there. Not going to read that. So this person gets in contact with the Sean Ryan podcast through this Sam Shamate, sending the email to both, and wants people to believe that there's this incredible capability the Chinese have, but also the United States, and wants people to believe he was being hunted down by various alphabet agencies connected with the federal government. Now, when I first heard about this, my instinct was this is one of those shiny objects they want you to look at when the real story that you should be focused on is over here. That was my first instinct. Now, let me say this. If there's more to the story, there's going to be other details that come forward. And does Donald Trump expose or bring to the details of the gravitic propulsion system that the U.S. Department of Defense has? And why haven't we been told about it as Americans in the past? And why haven't we been told about one of our enemies having that capability as well? It's going to take time to determine if that happens. But if this is true, and again, I just want to emphasize the FBI has confirmed the guy who was in the Cybertruck in Las Vegas was the author of this email. First. And secondly, it's a situation where, okay, wait and see what happens. But if this is true, this is huge. And this is the stuff of movies or TV programs and literally art becoming life. And it's been hard to process this because I listened to other uh, beginning segments of podcasts that involve people in the military, and they thought this was mind blowing. And if this is true, this is huge, and we aren't going to know until we know. And but I would encourage people always question the government. The lack of transparency with anti gravity propulsion systems, if indeed the US government has them and the US military has them, is just another sign of one of my rules of government. that I adopted as I followed government over 20 plus years in journalism. I call it Olson Rule number one: nothing good ever comes from the lack of transparency. So, with all of that, I bring this to a close, not to do so abruptly, but that's all I have for you this week. So, uh, the speaker situation, two issues involving finances, Social Security, and the writing of checks, and then that huge story that unfolded on New Year's Day and the days after, that involved the situation out of Las Vegas. So, with all of that, um, I am going to put in the comments of this podcast the Sean Ryan, the full Sean Ryan podcast, and I'm also going to put a lighter thing in there as well. So, writing a column for this weekend, and for those who read and share, thank you. Watch and share, thank you. Again, I'm trying to build an audience here and earn credibility while doing so. And just trying to bring things to your attention that just simply don't have a lot of attention by others in the media. So until next time, God bless and goodbye.